Is the UK producing enough scientists and engineers? Are the government and private sector spending enough on research and development? And how does innovation translate into internationally competitive industries and well-paid jobs? The UK Innovation Report from Cambridge Industrial Innovation Policy tracks these important questions and more. The report, released annually, puts the UK's industrial and innovation performance in a global context and brings together in a single place innovation and value-added indicators in a concise and accessible format. To remain competitive and thrive, the UK will need to modernise today's industries and reduce carbon industries whilst nurturing the industries of tomorrow. This will require a clear understanding of the interplay between innovation and industrial performance, making the UK Innovation Report an essential resource.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the launch of the 2026 Innovation Report. My name's Tim Minshall. I'm head of the Institute for Manufacturing at the University of Cambridge, which is where the team that produced this report are based. Important message first. For those in the room, no fire drill is planned. If the fire alarms go off, please exit through one of these two doors and head downstairs. This event is being live streamed, and welcome to those online, and also being recorded. And a recording will be made available in the next few days. But just to get started, I'd like to just run you through the agenda for this afternoon's event. I will wait and see if this works. If not, I will talk you through the agenda. I have thumbs up from the back there. Oh dear, there we go. Thank you very much. Swift response, much appreciated. We're going to start off with inviting Lord David Sainsbury up on stage, our former Minister for Science and Innovation, to set the scene for this innovation report with a few remarks. Then we're going to invite Dr. Carlos López-Gómez on stage to talk through the key points of this year's report, the particular things that stand out. And then, in an innovation for this year, we're going to invite the authors, all of them, on stage, to have a bit of a Q&A, which is a response to feedback from previous people who've attended these events to say, we'd like to hear a little bit more about the detail. Then there's going to be a panel discussion. We're going to invite up our three distinguished representatives of, I can say Dave Smith is a representative of the government as the National Technology Advisor, but also Sharon Todd from SCI, and also Stewart Lane from Renishaw. And we're going to have a nice discussion there for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions. So those are, please, as you're hearing everything today, start to think of your questions, both in the room. We'll also have the ability to take questions online as well. And I think that is all I need to say at the moment, other than we will all be done by 5 o'clock on this glorious sunny afternoon here in London. And with that, could I please invite and ask that we welcome Lord David Sainsbury onto the stage.
I think in my life I probably spent more time talking about innovation and innovation policy than any other subject. As my friends gleefully point out, my name actually appears in the Epstein papers, but to no one's surprise, in an email from Peter Mandelson to Epstein, referring to a book on innovation policy in Israel, which Peter Mandelson said came up in a discussion between myself and Gordon Brown when he was Prime Minister. So I think as a result of all these reports and discussions, I am in a position to say that this is a really excellent report on innovation, which really covers some very essential features of innovation as it relates to our economic success as a country. Why do I think the report is so good? I think, firstly, because the authors understand one of the most important points about the economic growth of countries, which is that they depend critically on the competitive advantage of the different sectors of the economy in world markets. If one is a neoclassical economist, and most economists still are, one believes that the growth rate of countries depends on market efficiency. Because the market efficiency is the same for all sectors, one doesn't need to worry about the capability for innovation of different sectors and their performance. But if one looks at the growth rates of the different sectors of any economy, it's clear that they grow at very different rates, depending on the competitive advantage of the sectors in world markets. And it's that loss of competitive advantage that accounts for the very dramatic shift which has taken place in the world economy in the last 2 decades, and which I think people do not really focus on and understand. But it's an extraordinary shift in the whole of the global economy, with all G7 countries showing lower growth rates, lower rates of economic growth. And at the same time, you see China and India have greatly increased their competitive advantage through innovation of many of their industries in world markets, and therefore shown extraordinary high rates of economic growth. Just to give you the figures of what an extraordinary change in the world economy this is, in 2000, the G7 countries had more than 40% of global GDP, while China and India together had less than 14%. By 2022, that is pretty much 20 years later, the picture had changed dramatically. The G7 share of global economy has fallen from 40% to 27%, while the share of China and India has risen from less than 14% to 27%. So the shares now between the G7 and China and India are almost exactly the same. Now, in this context, I think it's important to understand, let me just say this is a sort of rather technical point, but important. It's important to understand that sectors are made up of firms that all share the same competitive challenge. It was a real nonsense in the government industrial strategy that they referred to as advanced manufacturing as being a sector. Of course, advanced manufacturing is not a sector. It involves aerospace industry and the car industry, for example, which are completely different, have completely different strategic situations. And it's very important that we actually focus on the sectors that all face the same technical and capability challenge. Secondly, I think the authors of this excellent report understand that the competitive advantage of sectors depends critically on innovation. And policy makers need therefore to focus strongly on the innovation performance of sectors. Effective industrial policy should focus on strengthening the innovation and competitiveness of high value-added tradable sectors, putting innovation at the center of economic activity and recognizing structural change as a fundamental driver of long-term growth. The question for the UK is not whether we innovate, but whether the innovation translates into competitive industries at home. Growth strategies succeed when innovation connects to sectors that can scale, export, and compete globally. The Center for Sectoral Economic Performance at Imperial College, which I support, is doing a lot of work with sectors on the innovation strategies they should adopt so that they can compete in global markets. And I think there's a great deal of material in this year's innovation report which should be helpful to them and policymakers in general in looking at this whole question of innovation strategies. In particular, I think the section on the performance of the UK electronics sector, which I think is a new feature, particularly of this report, is extremely interesting and demonstrates the strategic direction that the UK should be taking. What we see in this sector is a long-term shift away from price-sensitive, high-volume manufacturing towards high-value, knowledge-intensive, and regulated niches. In an international context increasingly shaped by scale, capital intensity, and geopolitical fragmentation, the UK's competitive advantage lies in specialization, quality, and product differentiation rather than low-cost mass production sectors. So what we ought to be looking at, well, in fact, this report we are doing quite well, is in areas like metrology, photonics, and medical technologies. So I think, to sum up, this is really an excellent report, and I hope that in today's discussions we can reflect on the end on how sectors in the UK economy can speed up their rate of innovation and use it to strengthen their position in an increasingly competitive global landscape. Because if we don't do that, we're in real problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lord Sainsbury. Thank you, Tim. And thank you all for being here. My name is Carlos López-Gómez, and I'm very pleased to introduce the UK Innovation Report 2026, produced by the Cambridge Industrial Innovation Policy team, my colleagues here, based at the Institute for Manufacturing. So innovation today sits at the heart of economic strategy, not only in the UK, but across the world. The goal of this report is simple, is to provide evidence that helps inform better policy debates. So one central theme runs throughout the report, and that is the connection between innovation and economic performance. This is the 6th edition of the report, so 6 years already, I cannot believe it, and we are pleased to see that colleagues in government are finding it useful, as this slide shows. Now, what the report does. The report benchmarks the UK against international competitors and addresses a set of key questions that actually have been shaped with colleagues in government. How is the structure of the economy changing and how that affects economic performance? Are we investing enough in innovation? How are UK industries performing internationally? And as Lord Sainsbury mentioned, this year we focus on the electronics and electrical equipment sectors. Are we producing the right scientific and technical workforce? What are the things constraining technology scale-up? And my task in the next few minutes is to share some of the data highlights coming up from the report and discuss a few of the emerging implications. So let me start with jobs and wages. We sometimes forget, at the end of the day, innovation and economic growth are about good jobs. So understanding how the structured economy shapes wages is extremely important. So what this chart shows is an interesting shift in the labor market. Over the past decade, just here, the lowest paid industries have experienced the fastest wage growth, particularly in sectors such as accommodation and food services, administrative support, and agriculture, where vacancy rates remain high. By contrast, many higher paid industries have seen more moderate wage growth. So you see here, for example, manufacturing has been traditionally above the national average, but now sits just around the economy-wide median. Now let me turn to another key dimension, which is investment in innovation. And we start with the good news here. The UK remains a major global research economy. The country accounts for around 3.5% of global R&D spending, placing it 6th in the world, as you can see in this chart. It ranks 4th globally in number of scientific publications. So to give you a sense of the scale, the UK represents less than 1% of global population, but the country produces 6% of scientific publications and 12% of the world's most highly cited research. So that is an extraordinary concentration of knowledge production, but this is where the hard questions start. Because innovation policy is not just about productivity or producing research, it is about turning research into economic impact. Another interesting trend concerns how governments support innovation. This chart shows how government's financial support for business R&D is distributed. So whether the funding is directly given through grants and procurement in yellow, or indirect to tax credits in red. So we can see that 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, direct support dominated, both in the UK and across OECD economies. But spending on R&D tax credit has grown very rapidly. Across the EU, it has increased more than fivefold as a share of GDP, and the shift in the UK has even been more dramatic, as we can see here. Today, the UK Treasury provides around £7.6 billion a year in R&D tax relief. And to give you a sense of the scale, that would be enough to fund the entire operations of 3 universities of Cambridge. And I did check with my finance colleagues, and they will be happy to take it. But more seriously, there is a growing discussion around in policy cycles, but also in academic cycles, about getting the balance of the policy mix right. How different instruments, not just tax incentives, but also public science funding, more targeted innovation programs work together to support innovation and industrial outcomes. So let me be clear on this. Tax incentives can play an important role, and they do play an important role in encouraging firms to invest in R&D and innovation. So this is not about reducing the slice of the pie that goes to R&D tax credits, but it's about then ensuring that as the pie grows, we actually hit the right mix of policy instruments that best support long-term objectives. Now, this chart, it's a bit complex, shows scientific publications per 1,000 people on the vertical axis and high-tech exports as a share of total exports on the horizontal axis. So in simple terms, it's just a measure of research output with a measure of economic sophistication. So what we see is that in the UK, the number of publications continues to rise. So it goes in this direction. But the share of high-tech exports has been declining. By contrast, countries like Germany and Japan show stronger performance in high-tech exports alongside sustained research output growth. Now, this year, the report focuses on the electronics and electrical equipment sectors. Electronics, as you know, is one of the most important industries today in the world economy, underpinning everything from smartphones to artificial intelligence to energy systems. Yet the UK's share of global electronics has fallen sharply. You can see here that little arrow, from around 5% in 2000 to 1.1% today. At the same time, UK manufacturing has become more specialized in high-value niches like photonics, metrology, and medical technologies. And this is the interesting part. Value added in the sector in this period of time has increased by 400%. So actually, the output grows, but employment has halved in the UK. Some might think, well, that's expected because manufacturing jobs are declining, they just go to cheaper locations, or the jobs are reducing overall. But that's not entirely true. Other countries like the US and Japan, yes, they have lost market share. You see those two as well. But, and also China is always interesting, of course, because it grew rapidly from 2000 to 2015, and it decreased somewhat after that in the last 10 years. But China's employment has continued to grow. And then you have Taiwan, which is the one that has gained the most globally. And in Taiwan, in this period, added roughly the same number of jobs, which is a high-cost location. It's not the lower-cost locations in the world. It has added roughly the same number of jobs that the UK has lost, around 130,000 jobs in this area. So alongside competitiveness, the issue is also about scale and job creation. Now, another issue is skills. The sectors identified in the UK industrial strategy are highly skills intensive. Graduates already represent around 64% of the workforce in these sectors. and demand is set to grow further. So Skills England estimates that these sectors will require additional 623,000 jobs in priority occupations by 2030. These are priority occupation means occupations that are expected to grow, but already face skills challenges, or shortages rather. And this is a broader issue. In 2024, more than a quarter of vacancies in the UK were hard to fill due to skills gaps. Engineering is a particularly important bottleneck. In 2025, more than 3/4 of employers reported difficulties recruiting engineers, especially with sustainability skills. Now, let me highlight another structural feature of the UK economy. Innovation activity is highly concentrated in a small number of sectors. So the European Commission tracks the top 2,000 firms in the world that spend the most on R&D. Together, they account for around 90% of global business R&D. So what the data show is a high level of concentration. So just 5 technology firms, the big American tech firms that you know, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, and Apple, account for around 15% of global R&D in business. And for the first time, since the records began, each of these companies individually now spend more on R&D than the entire UK government. So the UK is present in this data set with a much narrower set of industries. There are 57 UK companies in the top 2,000, but only 2 in the top 100, AstraZeneca and GSK. More than half of UK businesses is concentrated in health and also strong representation in finance. So UK is the dark red. This points to a broader challenge. For example, if we see UK is largely absent from technology hardware sectors, which are key drivers of industrial growth elsewhere. Hardware and industrial technologies, of course, can be harder to scale, but they're also where many of the opportunities for growth and exports lie. Now, if we move finally to startups, the UK performed strongly in startup creation. It ranks 4th globally in the so-called unicorns, which are startups valued at over $1 billion. But many successful spin-outs are acquired by foreign firms as they mature. So at the Institute for Manufacturing, we have the University Commercialization and Innovation Unit by our colleagues, and they keep this data set of around 900 spin-outs from leading UK universities. 2/3 of these have involved foreign buyers when they're acquired. This is not necessarily a problem. Open economies attract global investors, but it raises a question about value capture. So in other words, where does the long-term economic value created by innovation ultimately reside? So now, let me conclude with the 4 key messages of the report. First, across many advanced economies, there is growing concern that research excellence does not automatically translate into industrial competitiveness. The UK clearly excels at generating knowledge, but the key policy question is whether that knowledge translates into industries that scale, export, and compete globally. Too often, innovation is evaluated through inputs, how much we spend on R&D, or through startup metrics. We tend to forget that a key test of success is sector competitiveness, whether innovation strengthens value added, exports, employment, and global market share. And that means thinking about innovation not just at the level of individual firms, but at the entire level of the entire sectors and industrial capabilities. So put simply, innovation alone does not create prosperity. Competitive industries that provide goods, jobs do. Second, innovation activity and technology scale-up in the UK are concentrated in a relatively small number of sectors, particularly life sciences, finance, and software. This concentration helps explain why strong innovation indicators are not always aligned with broad industrial competitiveness across the economy, especially in manufacturing and other strategic sectors. Policy debates, of course, we have here a lot of policy debates focus heavily on finance, venture capital, investment levels, and the depth of the local capital markets. But scale-up decisions are shaped by many other factors, including proximity to supply chains, access to specialized skills, regulation, and market access, which are sometimes as important as finance for these companies. And it is important to recognize that the UK is not alone in facing these dynamics. Across advanced economies, everybody is really talking about similar issues. Many successful firms scale internationally or are acquired by foreign global companies, particularly in the United States. So the key policy question is not simply about the creation of startups, but how innovation connects to a wider range of sectors across the economy. Third, as the electronics and electrical equipment sectors show, UK manufacturing is evolving towards high-value specialized niches embedded in global value chains. These niche areas can be extremely productive, but they can be also small in scale. In sectors such as electronics, value-added and productivity have increased because value output increase keeps growing, employment goes down, productivity increases a lot. But employment has halved, as I just mentioned. Specialization clearly supports competitiveness, but niche specialization alone may not generate the number of high-quality jobs the economy requires, which means scale matters. The opportunity for the UK lies in connecting a strong research base to sectors that can scale, generating both productivity and high-value employment at home. And finally, fourth, the UK has a strong pipeline of science, engineering, and technology skills, but the alignment between skill supply and labor market demand remains uneven. Engineering skills are emerging as one of the most important bottlenecks, and this matters because innovation ultimately depends also on people. Without the engineers, scientists, and technicians needed to deploy new technologies, innovation cannot translate into industrial growth, and that's why innovation and industrial strategy is also a skills strategy. I hope I have provided some examples of the data in the report. Obviously, I just went to a selection of the charts, but also probably highlight how difficult it is sometimes to interpret the data. It's not straightforward to find the meaning behind the numbers. So that's why it's so important to have discussions like today, to go actually and try to understand and make sense out of it. The good news is that the UK is one of the most innovative countries in the world. The real challenge is ensuring that innovation translates into industries that scale, export, compete globally, and provide good jobs. I hope this report contributes to this conversation. Thank you very much. I think the innovation that Tim mentioned is that now I don't get to answer your questions. I'm going to invite my colleagues. So please save your hard questions. So I'm going to invite my colleagues Michele, Jennifer, Zongshuai, and David to come to the stage. And yeah, the key point is that please think about your questions. And I'm not going to answer, they're going to answer. That's the innovation. More work to do. But I'm going to start while you guys and also people online type their questions. So I'm going to start, if I could, Jennifer, with you. Jennifer has been leading one of the sections on the report looking at the structure of the economy over the last few decades. So you have been looking at different indicators of how the economy is changing. So what are the highlights from the findings of your section?
Yeah, this year we focus on section 1 of the innovation report in 3 key measures. So we focus on labor productivity, employment, and earnings. And there are 2 key highlights. One is that we continue to see a strong productivity growth across manufacturing industries. One of these is electronics, but we also see a strong productivity growth in pharmaceuticals, in chemical manufacturing industries, and we continue to see a strong growth across knowledge-intensive services, and this includes telecommunications, scientific and research activities. However, as you mentioned, not always this productivity growth is aligned with what we are seeing in terms of employment growth. While in the case of knowledge-intensive services, we see both strong employment and productivity growth, this is not the case in all manufacturing industries. Having said this, I mean, we all know the negative employment trend that we have observed across many manufacturing industries. But we also see that since 2022, this trend has reversed in some of the manufacturing industries, and this is actually the case of electronics and electrical equipment since 2022, there seems some positive growth in terms of employment. We also see some positive growth in terms of chemicals manufacturing, so it's a mixed picture there, but there is also some hope, some positive signs.
And I think that reinforces this message around different sectors are different, and we need to look carefully at the dynamics in each of them. Now we can take questions either online or anyone here. Any question about the data that you have just seen? I'm happy to keep asking. Sharon, please. I don't know if we have a microphone.
Thank you. Could you give us some commentary about how the shape of the world has changed from an economic perspective? David referred to the rise of China and India and the impact, so maybe to the earnings and the financial strength or not, and any views on lost opportunity from a UK perspective? Lost opportunity in terms of GVA?
Yeah, you can probably, Michele probably can talk about the changes in the world economy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So like Lord Sainsbury said that just at the beginning, there has been a shift in share of the global GDP versus against the Southeast Asia economies. There are lots of opportunity, of course, for the UK, particularly for the manufacturing sectors. So what we are seeing in this analysis, in the innovation report and past analysis, is that the UK has a structural deficit in manufacturing goods. And these goods are coming from East Asia, basically. Initially from China, and later from the rest of the Southeast Asian economy. So it is not true that we are living in a post-manufacturing world. We are living in a manufacturing world, but the UK is currently importing most of the goods that we use every day, that we see around us right now.
Thank you. And I think when we looked at also the number of jobs in electronics actually increasing, because many people think all the manufacturing sectors are going to decrease in the number of jobs, but across the world, I mean, obviously, since the 90s, we consume more electronics as a society, and again, the value added of the UK has increased, but just that employment is going elsewhere. Any other questions, comments, complaints? Please.
Hello. First of all, thank you very much. Fantastic data, very impressive. When I look at the data, most of them are between 2010 till 2023, but as we all know, the last 2 years, most of the things change in the world, financially and geopolitically. So can we say that the data is up to date, or is there any improvement on the data in terms of UK capability of the innovation and overall the data? Is there any improvement, or are we still where we are?
Anyone wants to take that? Data availability, or do we know anything about the last year?
We used in this year financial report is the latest data we can get from the source we trust, like OECD and ONS. And in the next year, we're going to update the data. So yes, it's the latest one.
And I think also because of international comparisons, we need to wait. And every year there's new releases. But we have checked actually some of the data. For example, and last year we were looking at automotive. In national sources, we'll have newer data. David,
on that point, there's always an offset between where you are right now in time and the latest data available of 2 years roughly for all economic data and innovation data. So yes, just to confirm, it is the latest data unless you get into another type of sources like recent surveys with companies and so on. But again, this is entirely based on data sources that are defendable. That's the rationale.
Just a quick promotion. So this is the reason why we have a data dashboard in our website. So it's more updated data if we have one. So we update every year like this one. So welcome to visit our dashboard to check the latest one.
Good promotion. Thank you, Sonja. That's great. As always, we have a product for it. I think there's a question just there. Thank you.
Hello. Your comment around employment growth and decline, what kinds of signals do you think that is sending to young people today about the opportunities in innovation, manufacturing, engineering, when I'm sure you're all aware when you read the news today, young people are really struggling in terms of employment opportunities. Just yesterday on the BBC, there was a university graduate talking about how they've applied for 500 jobs in 2 months and not got anything. So these signals that you shared here in terms of what the data is saying, that's fairly concerning in terms of what opportunity there is for young people. So what do you think policymakers should do to change this narrative, to really engage young people in the opportunities and innovation across all the sectors where we have competitive advantage?
Thank you. And this is another innovation. The audience is going to respond to that. So if you guys, I think I would like to bring Lord Sainsbury and perhaps Tim. And I think he's here.
I'd just like to make the point that if you look at the report, you'll see that there's a huge number of vacancies in this country. I think it's something like 700,000 vacancies. And I think the figures there, I can't remember exactly, but something like a quarter of those are vacancies because there are not the technical people to do them. So one of the things we have to do is try and get people to understand that actually going to university or FE college is not only about developing their soul and their interest in modern literature or medieval French. It is also getting the capability to do jobs. And there are very good figures which show that there's a whole swathe of courses now at British universities which do not actually lead to you having a better salary as a result of taking that course. So it's not a question, I think, of stopping these courses, but it is a case of saying to people, if you want to get a job at the end of this, you really do need to think about whether the course you're taking is one that will give you actually access to jobs. The second thing is we have a continuous and very long history of vacancies for technical education jobs. I mean, it goes back forever. It is constant. There is an absolute shortage of this. We now do have a proper national system of technical qualifications, and we've got to get more people to see that there are real opportunities in these jobs, in these courses leading to getting jobs. So there is some real things that we can do to help this problem. And I think you can now see, particularly in people who are graduating, a real distress about not being able to get jobs. And we need to explain that if you do take courses which don't lead to jobs, then that is inevitably what happens.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything, Tim? Yeah. Well, their team has an amazing book as well that talks a little bit about, I don't know if you want to add anything around jobs and maybe for, okay, let's take a couple more questions.
It's David Connell of the Centre for Business Research at Judge. First of all, I want to congratulate you on the whole series of reports that have been produced over the years, which seem to get better and better. I have to say it's wonderful to find so much different relevant data in one place. There is, of course, one piece which is missing, which is the data on individual UK R&D company spending, which was collected under Lord Sainsbury's initiative until about 10 years ago in the R&D, what's it called, the R&D scoreboard. And I think that's a key missing perspective, which gives one the chance of looking through time at trajectories over companies. So I've got a question relating to that, really, which is, you know, one of the key issues of the day, very recently reported on in Rachel Reed's recent announcement, is the loss of UK companies to foreign acquirers. And the question is, you know, is that inevitable? Is there anything we can do about it? My personal view is that the UK's focus in policy and R&D tax credits, as illustrated in the graph, is part of the problem because the bulk of innovation support is only available to companies effectively, early stage companies, with VC investments at scale. And if you have a VC investor, you will be sold if you're successful. So there's a question there. But my broader question to you is, do you have in mind for future analysis and reports any work which will enable us to look through time at the trajectories that companies pursue, particularly startups we're talking about, but others as well, and how the form of support that they have, the strategies that they adopt, the funding sources that they get, and the structure of those relates to the economic outcome in the long term in the UK in terms of jobs, export earnings, and longevity. Sorry, rather long question.
Thank you.
I hope it's
Thank you. I think there's one here as well. That's just there. Yes, if you can keep it short, please. Thank you.
Short and sweet. Good afternoon, Tom McGee at Tech UK. It's a great report. I'd like to ask about public policy implications. So what recommendations might our panelists have for the UK government as it looks to continue its implementation of the UK industrial strategy, which in theory is due to run until 2035?
Thank you so much. Do we take one more? Do we have time? Yes.
Thank you, Carlos and team. It's Claire Porter from the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. On a day when Innovate UK has published its new strategy for the future, which is very much focused on scaling high-growth businesses, I just wondered if you reflected in the research you did internationally whether other countries have similar approaches resulting in greater innovation and growth. And if there were certain things that you would identify internationally, be it, say, institutional or policy, I guess, approaches, that would lead to better results as well.
Thank you so much. So I think we're going to leave some of the questions for the next panel, especially about policy implications and startups and foreign acquisitions. But I think there was a specific question on firms, farm and R&D scoreboards. I don't know if you want to
Thank you very much for the question, because it's important. As we recognize the importance to conduct analysis at a firm level base. Of course, this report is generic, it's more broad than that. We cannot go into much detail. However, referring to, for example, chart 2.9, we have the data on how the UK is performing at firm level compared to other countries. And we use data from the European Union Industrial Innovation Scoreboard. And we see two trends, basically. The first is that the number of companies with headquarters in the UK has been decreasing since in the last 15 years in the group of the major innovators in the world. The second trend is that this applies to every country, every more advanced country, with the exclusion of the United States, against an increase of investors from China. This is the main result. The second result that we saw is that in the UK and also in other countries, the R&D expenditure is pretty much concentrated toward the pharmaceutical sectors and across a very few number of companies, large companies. So concentration on R&D expenditure is one of the main features across advanced economies.
So I think there's some questions online, please.
Yeah, this question, can you hear me? Okay. Since this is an international comparative report, do you have any figures on industrial subsidies of the UK versus, say, the EU? What about EU Scale-up Fund versus the British Business Bank?
So that's an interesting question. Anybody want to take that, or shall we give it to the National Technology Advisor later?
Who doesn't have the answer?
So anything on the different types of subsidies?
Well, we could do the analysis, which we didn't do actually. We did last year only for the United Kingdom using HM revenue and customs data, but the analysis potentially possible using the OECD tax, R&D tax credit database. we will do the analysis next year. This is a good feedback. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's very useful. Great ideas. Please catch these guys. They're going to be after. So any questions or any requests, it's always useful for us because we decide what are the topics and the questions we're going to be looking at the next year and the data sources as well. So now we move to the next part of the event. And Tim, please. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Carlos, and authors. I like this innovation that we're not only redesigning things in advance by having this extra session, we're now innovating by having responses from the audience, thank you very much, Lord Sainsbury, but also chucking the questions forward to the next group coming in. I think it's fantastic. So could I please ask Sharon, Stewart, and Dave to join me on stage for the start of this panel discussion, please. If you can just position yourselves here. So I noticed that our National Technology Advisor is now looking a little bit nervous.
I was Googling the answer to the last question, and Google didn't give me the answer in that lovely AI bit it does now, so I still don't have the answer. But you've all got devices with all the knowledge in the world on it. Also, we don't like the word subsidy. By the way, we like the word investment. Subsidy has very significant legal ramifications, and the government would not wish to discuss them.
Well, that sets the scene nicely. Could I just ask each of our panellists to introduce themselves briefly first? Sharon, please.
Of course. I'm Sharon Todd. I'm delighted to be here. I'm the Chief Executive of an organisation called SCI. We were established in 1881 by the founders of the last industrial revolution. We are a scientific innovation accelerator, accelerating science out of the lab and into the industry for the benefit of society. So long-standing, this is absolutely our space in the area of science. And I'd like to come back to that question because we've done some analysis on that. So,
perfect.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
Stuart.
So Stuart Lane, I work for a company based in the southwest near Bristol called Renishaw. We've been in business for over 50 years. We're an innovative company. We invest 12 to 13% of revenues every year in R&D. And we are predominantly a tech/electronics company.
Great, thank you, Stuart. And Dave.
So I'm the National Technology Advisor and appear to be blamed for everything already, so I'm sort of bracing myself. I'm effectively a sort of business engineer in government to advise government in the way that chief scientific advisors advise government, but drawing on my experience of running engineering companies, developing products, etc. And there is no obligation for the government to take my advice, I notice.
So if I've got it right then, you're the first National Technology Advisor.
Wikipedia says I'm the third, but I think I'm the first doing the job like this with this background, yes.
Excellent. So we also have the first Minister for Science and Innovation in the room as well. So this is quite an important gathering. So as you can see, we've got a great panel. And I know it's a bit of a cheesy question, but I'd just like to start off with the obvious one, which is having looked at the report, what are the initial standout things for you from the perspective of yourself or the industry you represent or your organisation? Maybe start with you, Sharon, please.
Yes, I think it was a great report. It's really good to see all of that data come together. That's absolutely what we need, that level of analysis. I think for us, you know, we're looking down the lens of science, and there's a whole set of scientific industries that operate in the UK and elsewhere. Is this picture of structural change and what that means, and whether we need to innovate in terms of how we think about industry, about innovation going into the future. So Lord Sainsbury talked about the big shift into China and India, and actually it was on one of the report highlights about R&D. When you look at the percentage, that gives you one picture, but when you look at the absolute number in terms of investment, for example, into science in some of these other countries, we are facing structural change. And I think that is really important to recognise. We've looked at various different sectors, including life sciences, where things are not great, things that we can't assume that things are great. And I think the real question for us as a community is, How can we bring all of our skills and knowledge to bear to work out what the way forward is? Because I think we would argue that some of the old ways of working or thinking are not actually going to work in this new world.
Great point, thank you. Stewart, your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I'd probably lead on from that then and say I feel that there are grave concerns about what's going on in industry in the UK. It was pleasing to see growth in the electronics industry, as the report highlighted, but also a bit of a vision of the future, which is jobs actually going down.
Right.
So how do we balance that equation? I really don't have a clear picture of how that's going to play out in the future. We took the guest's comment earlier regarding someone who's applied for a lot of jobs. We're talking a lot about AI. Where do we see the future of our workforce? Where do we see the future of our industry? So for me, the report posed more questions than answers, if I'm honest.
Which is, I guess, one of the things we're interested in is what questions have we not answered, but also what other questions need to be asked.
Yes.
And that whole issue of technology and people, and it's changing quite dramatically and very, very fast. I think we just have not caught up with. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And Dave, your initial thoughts?
And I think one thing, unhelpfully, I'll preface this, I think this is a superb report and incredibly valuable. And I think things are about to change very rapidly in ways we can't forecast. Because I think the impact of agentic AI is going to be 1,000-fold the impact of LLMs. And I'm starting to see some remarkable things happening across a number of sectors. We're running a prize at the moment. The prize winners are announced next week. And some of the prize winners can do most engineering. The agents can do engineering to an incredibly high standard. What does that mean for our workforce? What does that mean for our companies? Really good question. I think there'll be winners and losers out of that, and I think we have to win. However, let's put that crystal ball catastrophizing or optimism away, depending on how you want to spin it. I think one of the things that struck me was how good we are at basic research. And you could even argue we're too good at basic research because we're not good enough at the translation. And our basic research spending 14% of business, 39% of government, which is way ahead of the OECD averages, almost double in one case. And when you look at the papers and citations we produce, it's awesome. There was another report that IFM did, which I can quote because I paid for it, but they did it. One of the stats was the number of papers produced per whatever the denominator was, capita, spend on R&D, doesn't really matter. Way ahead of everyone else. I mean, stunning. Other than Canada, I think, bizarrely. And then you look at patents per denominator, and we're way below everyone else. So there's this issue of being brilliant at basic research and then not brilliant at turning that into products. And products are companies and jobs and tax revenues and things people can use and make their lives better or worse if it's social media. So I think there's a gap in our approach, in our innovation ecosystem between the brilliance of the basic research. And you can't say, oh, but we're not very good at business, we're not entrepreneurial, because if you look at the unicorns, we dominate Europe. We're fantastic at that innovation and new companies. So there's a really interesting structural issue with how our innovation system works. And there are lots and lots of positives, and then probably a weakness in the middle somewhere between the two. And it's also striking how much goodness is in life sciences and fintech when you look at the value and the amount of R&D that's spent. And that's great. We don't want those to go down. But we're missing in some other areas. And again, I'm going to give you a litany of government policies and a commentary on them, but we have consistently invested in aerospace very effectively through the Aerospace Technology Institute, enormous amounts of money that are not subsidies, to be absolutely clear. They're investments in R&D. And in automotive through the Advanced Propulsion Centre. So we do pick industries and support them, and yet there are two that totally dominate. And I think part of having the industrial strategy is to build up some of those others so that we're a bit more balanced.
That's a great lead into something I'd like to follow on with, which is this ability to be good at the left-hand end of the funnel. An interesting phrase you used there, which is almost we're too good, or we overemphasize that, but I guess we can't underemphasize it.
It's obviously a good thing,
yeah,
and
I just want to make sure we've got that message.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
excellent. Yes, and. So it's the rest of it. It's that scale-up bit. So maybe just picking up on your comment there, Dave, and Sharon, your thoughts on this. What are we not doing right that makes it so difficult to do that next bit? What's the thing we're doing wrong? What are we not doing?
So I'll just talk about the science space. I'm not a tech expert. In the area of science, it's hugely challenging taking a product out of the lab and scaling it. You know, the science changes when you scale. The skills that are needed often reside in large companies and not in universities. And it's really hard for the startup companies to get that kind of knowledge. Process scale up, for example, engineering, being another area. So the challenges are huge, and I think there's more that we could do to help mentor companies in the science space to apply, we do this at SCI, but to apply the knowledge that we have in the large companies into the small companies. There's quite a lot of this might be pre-competitive, so not, you know, but that kind of mentoring of how you take technologies out of the lab, the sorts of things that you need to do. So I think there's one track there. There's definitely another track, and I think it relates very specifically to the topic here around we don't encourage the process through our policy frameworks to manufacturing. And we have done a piece of work on this with some of the companies that we work with. We're looking at the different schemes, so R&D tax credits, patent box, for example. And we did a sort of analysis of the different types of incentives and how they were playing out. And what you find is some countries focus on certain things. So Switzerland, we all know, is very strong on the sort of patent box and the patenting. We've obviously got R&D tax credits. Companies that were doing really well have actually linked all of those incentives, and then they've added one at the end, which is to manufacturing. And that would be smart. And they didn't call it manufacturing, by the way. They added it in another box. And so from a company perspective, when you look at that and you're calculating where you're going to start your investment and what that's going to look like, you're going to look at that whole chain of incentives. Mm-hmm. So I do think that's something we could do. We could look at that and I think drive more incentives to that final piece of manufacturing or look at how we take people through that journey. And I think the other one, again, this has been quite a well-travelled one, is really around the funding schemes. So, you know, the ability of science-based industries to get funding all the way through the chain and then to get to the end and find a successful outcome is challenging. And I think the government's doing quite a lot of that work around the mentioned house reforms and deployment of pension funds in particular, away from the 4%, which I think we currently put in, back up to where we used to be many years ago. So I think there's several elements to it that we could really actively work on.
Particularly interested by that comment there about, as you describe it, the good companies are those that can link these activities together, but there's still this sort of and manufacturing bolted on the end, as opposed to saying that's an integral part of the whole process.
Yes.
Maybe from a Renishaw point of view, or any perspective you wish to take, Stewart, this issue about what's stopping us doing the scaling, because your business has, it's been, you know, it's one of the poster childs.
Yeah, so, I mean, we do our manufacturing. All our manufacturing is in-house for a number of reasons. Mainly around controlling the supply chain, if I'm honest. And also we're still a niche player in a much larger industry. In order to be able to serve the industry that we sell into as well as possible, we have to maintain that control. We don't have the scale. Mm-hmm. And we, if I'm totally honest, we also wanted to make profit. We're an entrepreneurial company. We wanted to make profit at each stage in the process, and manufacturing is a core part of that. Mm-hmm. Our founders didn't necessarily want that to go to other people, if I'm totally honest.
So it was baked in from day one, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And it's fair to say that from our perspective, there have been certain times in our history where if we didn't have that in-house manufacturing capability, we could not have responded to the market. We would not be the company that we are today if we'd have subcontracted.
So You can see where this is heading, Dave. Given that message, that the pull, that the desire to have, the importance of having manufacturing as an integral part of the whole innovation chain, as shown by the data as well in the report, what's the thing we need to do to allow that to happen more easily?
That's good. Someone should write a book about manufacturing. I mean, there's a really interesting question, like who should, there's what, and then there's who.
Yep, fair point.
And there is one of the things I find myself having to check is, what is government's role? Because government can't do everything, shouldn't do everything. Lots of things. One of the arguments for keeping R&D tax credits is, because if you don't do that, government will make more decisions about where R&D is done. And is that a good thing? Open. Sorry, I was sort of distracting from your question while I thought of an answer. I think one of the reasons manufacturing left many countries, not just ours, is because labour costs were a critical element in competitiveness. And that's less and less true as automation grows and grows and grows. So the idea of onshoring and bringing it back starts to become more practical. It's still a big capital investment, and there's a massive skills gap. So do we have the people and the skills? So one thing we could do is look at our ability to train from every level, PhD down to technician, people who can manufacture in this new world of enormous automation of manufacture and enormous amounts of robotics and human, whether it's humanoid or whether it's not, and the ability of AI to work out how to do manufacture. There's potential for a revolution there, which gives us, chaos is opportunity, change is opportunity, but to do it, I think you do need to do it at a national scale, and maybe government's role is to say, why don't you do this? But it can't be government's job to go and do it and make the capital investments, and I think providing the trained people, though, can be government's job.
So this whole issue of right people, right place, right time seems to be a message that's coming out. But maybe just given that the report focuses this year on electronics and electrical machinery, coming back to you again, Stewart, and then to others, and then just to warn the audience here in the room and online, then we'll turn to questions from you. The observation that's made in the report about the way the sector has changed, moving from high volumes to this niche specialisation, highly productive. Do you firstly agree with that analysis of your industry, and does it reflect broader issues for the innovative manufacturing sectors more broadly?
Do I agree with the report? Yes. And again, taking Renishaw's experience, we make electronic product for the electronics and semiconductor industry. We're not in the business of providing all of the systems. We actually provide very small niche components that without which you would not be able to manufacture semiconductors. You wouldn't have an electronics industry at all. And why have we focused on that? Because we can't compete as a manufacturer simply based on unit cost. Agreeing with your point that automation is now making that equation easier, but we're very much about the value add and the R&D and the manufacturing being a means to that end. So we very much agree with that. What could be done to try and reverse it? There are certain initiatives that we're aware of in other countries where incentives are offered to manufacturers and not just about R&D. So that can be around investment in capital equipment. Certainly we're seeing that in Italy. We're seeing that in Germany. So there's very much an incentive there for manufacturers to invest in the latest tech, which is often greener, more productive. And that's certainly something that we're an advocate of as well.
And Sharon, from a broader perspective of a different but related industry, this trend towards niche and specialisation, and then maybe just, if you wouldn't mind commenting, linking that back to your early comments about the people needed to scale stuff up.
Yes.
Can you link those two thoughts together?
Yes, I'll try. So I think there's a broader piece, and going back to my point about structural change, I think we need to be very careful about withdrawing and entrenching into niches. I think we need to be really careful and we need to be really thoughtful about what this future pathway looks like. There's so many changing dynamics. The trends we've seen of investment by countries like China and India into basic materials is now happening into specialty materials. And they're doing this on scale, and you might want to comment on this. So I think our opportunity with all the innovation we have in the UK is to think more broadly and reconsider what this future is going to look like. We need to think about resilience, national resilience. We need to think about national resilience. We need to think about solid supply chains. And we need to think about critical capabilities. All of those things underpin niches, but they can also help expand into other areas. And I think the point that Dave's made is a really interesting one. You know, the sort of AI coming to the fore, there's a whole new way of doing manufacturing. You know, these big plants, that certainly in the sectors that we work in, chemical plants, you know, are a feature probably of the past. You know, and the opportunity for the UK is what do we build back and where do we build it and how do we build it smartly? I think we would advocate that there's a two-pronged pathway going forward, one that does actually start to build back. You know, we're an import nation now. We're importing 80%, 85% of our needs. I mean, we're massively import exposed. You know, so what's that trajectory? And then what's the trajectory around niche? And then I absolutely agree, how do we build into manufacturing? Let's become a manufacturing nation again.
Oh, blimey, that's, yes.
You didn't prime me on that one either, did you? No.
Couldn't argue with that. I think that's brilliant. Thank all three of you. I think it's now time to turn to the audience, but I'm going to look to Elizabeth first to see perhaps if we start off with, are there any questions online or go straight to the room?
I'll go to the room first.
Yeah, of course. So, any comments or questions people would like to raise? There's one here, please. But would you mind just waiting for the microphone? Just here, please. Oh, we just need it for online.
Do you think it's realistic to bring manufacturing back to this country with energy prices undifferentiated between productive industries and feckless consumers such as my family?
Who's going to respond to that one?
Did you want me to?
Please,
we
Sharon.
have to. That's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the elephant in the room. We have to fix energy prices, and that's not a fix. We have to have a strategy forward for energy that is good for the consumer as well as industry. And everybody knows that industry needs secure and competitive energy to thrive. So I think there's a fundamental issue there. You're absolutely right to point it out that needs to be addressed before any of this happens, before anything in the report happens. Absolutely.
So, Dave, we were having that discussion before with Lord Sainsbury about this issue. Would you care to bring elements of that in?
I'm going to be very cautious in what I say. I agree it is the elephant in the room, and without solving that problem, we have a massive barrier. I think it affects different sectors very differently. I don't think all manufacturing would be crippled by high energy prices. It wouldn't help. I think if we look at the chemicals industry, and it's a complex picture, but it's a very, very sad picture in the UK at the moment. And it's not obvious what we're going to do about it, but Sharon and I are discussing what we're going to do about it. And I think there are energy-intensive industries where it is a fundamental problem, but the solution does impact on everyone. And when you start looking at what the solutions might be, a solution that makes it good for industry, but then people who are struggling have very large energy bills, that isn't a good solution politically or morally. So, you know, it is a complex picture, and of course then it gets politicized and it gets turned into some sort of net zero is an evil woke thing, and all this bollocks, if I may say so. So it becomes harder to have a rational discussion about the options for an energy system and then the pricing of an energy system. And those two things can be quite separate. We were talking earlier about David Mackay's rather wonderful book on how you can decarbonise an energy system in multiple ways. There's all sorts of choices you can make. And they certainly don't all drive cost up. Many of them would drive cost down ultimately. But there is an investment to be made.
Either of you care to comment on Bill's question? Stewart?
I think from a Renishaw perspective, energy isn't a limitation. I think that growing manufacturing in the UK is extremely capital intensive, as mentioned by Lord Sainsbury before, and there is also a requirement for an appetite for risk. And I think it's been easier to get returns in the UK in other industries historically. And I also sometimes wonder whether the UK government understands the role that manufacturing has to play. But on top of that, going back to your point, we're talking at the moment about a real pivot from a very horizontal-based economy, I guess, if you like, to one that is looking vertically. Only hearing that Trump might want to invade Greenland a couple of weeks ago certainly focused my mind in terms of where we are in the world, who our partners are, and what do we have to have as our national identity. Big questions.
So, anything you wish to add to that, Sharon?
I think without diving down a rabbit hole, the point about resilience is key. In a lot of the sectors we deal in, they are highly integrated. They are sectors that have been laid down for 80 years. We've all forgotten where things come from. Everything is carbon. everything is carbon, pretty much. And so to the point about solid supply chains, which I think maybe could be a piece of work for your next report.
There we go.
And competitiveness in energy, you know, solving those problems, I think will be really key to underpinning the growth that we need in manufacturing.
Right. So I'm going to take a couple more questions from the audience, but just to warn our three panellists here, the final question I'm going to give you both, all three of you, is the one most important urgent thing you reckon we should do. I'll just leave that thought there. Right, from the audience, maybe Elizabeth, we do? Yep.
This is a question from online. Subsidies are not just about R&D tax credit. Do you see a lack of financing for hardware industries as a major bottleneck, and what is the answer?
It's kind of at what level, isn't it? You know, there's the sort of financing Renishaw might want and be able to access versus a startup versus a medium-sized company. And in each of those cases, you would access finance in a different way from different places. I think we tend to focus quite a lot on the startup to scale up problem on the basis that big companies have lots of options for how they can raise capital investment. So if we take that as read, right or wrong, I think a lot of the things the government is doing is harnessing more finance with the government aspect. So the British Business Bank, the National Wealth Fund, they're being increased, they're being given strategic direction of investing in deep tech, rather than the historic sort of invest in land in this country and you can't go wrong, which is just dead money from the point of view of an economy. So I think there are a lot of good things happening. The Mansion House Accords, there's a lot of people today complaining about how horrific it is the government would make pension funds spend their money in any particular way. And I think we need to hold our nerve and say, well, you're wrong. We should, because if you look at pension funds in the US, they invest in equities and they make a far better return for their pensioners than our pension funds do. So there is a skills issue, though. Our pension funds are not equipped to invest in these things. They don't have the skill sets today. But we're trying to do something about that. So I think there are lots of ways of getting at money. And that scale-up funding, the big gap problem we have a brilliant venture capital market, probably the best, possibly the best in the world per capita. But the big problem we have is like 100 million to 400 million. That proper scale up, you've got a company, you've got products, and now you want to internationalize or spread your product, whatever you want to do. That's where the gap is, and that's where we end up with a lot of overseas investment, which is better than no investment, but then you have the threat of those companies moving overseas in ways you don't want, as opposed to internationalizing. So I think we are trying to unlock that with the government are trying to unlock that with the Mansion House Agreement. And I think it's really important to hold our nerve and try and do that.
care to comment on that particular issue, either of you, Stewart or Sharon? Or no?
Tech, hardware, I think was the question, which isn't sort of my area, but I think if that's why I was looking at you.
Sorry.
I'm happy to dive in, but I think you probably have more expertise in this area than me.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Yes, it was a level of investment to allow physical tech-based activities to grow beyond the use of government investment, private sector side.
I think it's that, but it's also the appetite for risk in the first place. Is it a business that you've got to get into? Is it the right business environment for manufacturing? And I don't think that the UK has a stronger case as it's had historically. If I'm totally honest, I think in terms of investment itself, starting up a manufacturing company, machining, something that we would look into, you're talking tens to hundreds of millions of pounds, and that's a significant amount of capital to raise, and you've got to have a very strong business plan to do so.
So maybe this is one, again, for next year's report, along with the great global supply chain comment earlier, around investment for hard tech and deep tech. Whereas, I no idea what's going to happen with AI, but the move of money into the defence sector and security sector seems to be releasing more money for things such as this. But that's based on anecdote rather than data. Other questions, please. One here, please.
Strategies, and how, if that is the answer, then how should we be doing it?
Oh, thank you very much. Now, the chemical industry, very regional.
So the sectors that we serve are quite regional, and that's because of how they've been built up, and that's because of what the core capabilities they need. For example, access to ports for import-export flows, and the kind of investment of plants alongside each other that makes sense from a cost competitive perspective. So actually the regional lens is important, and I think you can't do everything everywhere. I think, this government seems to be wanting to make some choices. I think that's actually a positive thing. And, we can't sort of spread the love, but there are certainly in our areas natural places for things to be growing and innovation clusters to be sort of placing themselves, traditional places that you would recognise around the northeast, northwest, and Grangemouth, Scotland, port-based with infrastructure.
Stewart or Dave, any comments on the regional aspect?
Well, Renishaw would say the southwest, of course. I'd better get that one out there. I mean, obviously, from a manufacturing point of view, the Midlands is still incredibly important. And that's probably where I'd focus.
Thank you.
Yeah, I live in a region, so I think one of the things, just from a government perspective, yes, we should clearly be investing regionally, and regions have different characteristics of which industries they're particularly strong in, and why not build on that? Sometimes it's geographic, sometimes it's random history, it doesn't matter, I don't think. I think one of the challenges is the ability of the region to use the money effectively. So if you look at the West Midlands Authority or Manchester or Strathclyde, they're really very, very, very good at it. I'm sure there are others as well, not, and all the others. But they are sort of demonstrably very good at it. I think there are other areas where you don't have sufficient concentration. So the big mayoral authorities have quite a lot of money and can employ a lot of very able people, can hire Accenture to work out how to do things, and then can do this very professionally. There are other areas which are much more sparse and don't have the critical mass, where it would just be very difficult for them to make the right decisions and deploy things in the right way. And that's not patronising, that's maybe we should change the system of government such that they all have critical mass and can do that very well. So yes, I think we should do it, and then we should be a little bit cautious about a one-size-fits-all approach.
Great, thank you. One last question, and then we're going to move on.
I guess I got it. I'm Chris Case from Oxford PV. We're actually an Oxford University spin-out, 15 years on. Unfortunately, still not a unicorn. but we make the world's most efficient solar panels. And we are more than interested in manufacturing in the UK. And it is exactly what you said, that gap at the 100 million level, sort of the scale-up funding into things that is most difficult to access. And 9 years ago, we went to Germany for our first plant because of lack of access. So I would never use the word subsidy, but why not offer government guarantees? So I know it's one of the sort of platforms, not direct money. We've got people with the money. They just don't want to take the risks. So a government subsidy would be a way to encourage us. And then, so just a comment. And then the other thing is, in that chart 1.7, there were wages for various sectors. It was not a comparison chart against the rest of the world, and it's difficult to compare wages, across economies. But all of those numbers were small. And we find it impossible to attract engineering talent for the wages that are normal in the sector, and in Oxford, one of the worst, affordability places. Some of our younger engineers live in shared housing. All of them do live in shared housing. So how do we fix the wage problem too?
Whoa. Thank you very much for comment and question. Any of our three like to comment on that?
Another gentleman there just...
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we remember this one about wages and people, very important. Thank you. Another one, and then we'll... Yep, at the back, please.
Hi, I'm George Dietz from ADS, and my question is a bit more future-oriented, I should say. So I was really interested in that weakening link between productivity, growth, as well as employment. And looking into the future, especially 20, 30 years down the line, what are the risks of ignoring that growing detachment between employment, numbers potentially going down, going back on earnings, maybe earnings stagnating, but growth going up? Does it diminish the relevance of innovation and of all that comes with that?
Right. I think, any reflections on that? And either of those 2 points there, specifically about if we don't pay people enough in these critical innovation sectors, we're not going to attract the talent. Anyone that first one? How do we...
I mean, fundamentally, your business needs to be strong enough, growing enough, and have enough margin for you to pay the market price. And we're of the view that government should be making the environment attractive enough for businesses to be growing like yours and to be putting manufacturing in. If it's I can't imagine you're in Oxford. That's an amazing place to be for young people. What is it? Where are they going? Where else are they going? They're certainly not going into the sectors that I'm in, because we're struggling for engineers as well. So I think, I'm not answering the question directly, but I think fundamentally you want strong, growing businesses with more profits coming in so that they can actually pay market price for things. I mean, we've got a similar issue, for example, with data scientists, where we need a huge influx of data scientists, but of course they're in popular demand in other places.
Just on this issue of labour and salaries, anything, Dave or Stewart, you wanted to add before we move to the final question I've prepped you with?
I've forgotten the phone. Oh, no, I haven't. I remembered. Yeah.
That was the one I was preparing, and we caught the other one.
Right, well, we are... one thing I've been told, absolutely, is we will not run over. Right. So, apologies. Maybe in the discussion we can come back later to that final question over there. But I really would like to hear your thoughts on, given a magic wand, the most urgent, most important one thing we could do that would address some of these critical issues identified in the report about how do we get beyond this start-up, over-focus perhaps on the science in the beginning, to actually scale up and build strong businesses in the UK. Sharon, do you want to start?
Yes, I do. So I think there are two things. Sorry.
That's fine.
I think fundamentally we have to deal with the elephant in the room. Fundamentally, across all manufacturing, whether that's a large or small percentage of your manufacturing for domestic. And Dave alluded to this, it's a difficult topic because it's becoming highly politicised. We're a scientific organisation. We need to unpick it. We believe we need to unpick what we're doing in order to put back a sensible way forward towards net zero. There's deep challenges. It's a complex topic. There's multiple things involved. There's now lots of commentary on different parts of it. As a society, I think we believe we need to be tackling that topic in a scientific way and to be finding a new way forward to net zero that addresses energy, price and cost for domestic users as well as industrial users. It's pretty fundamental. I think on the point about startups or scale-ups, I think there's definitely the incentives piece. We should be promoting manufacturing as an important value add for the UK and what that brings. And alongside that, I think for me, mentoring companies through the valley of death and through there's all these other aspects, but mentoring them through, I think certainly in our area would be really helpful.
And as you say, you have that great talent pool in the large firms who know how to do this.
Yes.
Great point, yeah. Stewart.
I would look at the incentives that other countries in Europe have provided for the manufacturing industry, because I think that's something that you can look at relatively quickly. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I would like clarity on, I think, is in terms of where we're going with defence spending. There's a lot of people in manufacturing watching and waiting, but without commitments, there isn't going to be any investment. And if we do want to give the industry a bit of a kickstart, it might be a good place to look.
Great point. Thank you. And Dave.
Yes. So I'm going to ignore government support and the fact that defence investment plan is a little bit delayed. I think fundamentally in our system, we ask universities to do too much. We ask them to educate, to do basic research, and then to do applied research, and then to spin out companies and create unicorns. And you're looking at one institution with a fragile sort of economic position, with largely one set of incentives and one culture, and you're asking them to do all of that, and that's not a sensible thing to do. They do a brilliant job, but it's not sensible. So I think we could do with different institutions to fill that gap between our entrepreneurial unicorn brilliance and our basic research brilliance. But that's not a quick solution. Maybe the current UKRI reforms might sort of drive that in some Darwinian way. But that's a long, slow solution if we're going to do it. I think maybe a quicker one is something we are going to do, which is around using government procurement to drive innovation of British companies. So the government spends about 400 billion a year. The MOD and the DHSC between them spend about half of that. And we have a new Procurement Act, we have new laws, we have new principles from the Treasury, we have MAT, not meat, which Google will tell you about if you want. So we have a real opportunity to use government procurement now specifically to drive innovation. And we are taking tangible measures to do that. And the Chancellor referenced that a little bit in the Mays lecture on Tuesday. So I think that's something we could do that would be transformational. And then the private sector, our industries, have to respond to that.
Great. So I think we've covered quite a lot of ground there. Thank you very much to the panellists. And it's so nice to hear that discussion about there are massive, as you say, the elephants in the room that we just cannot ignore. But there's a huge amount of nuance as we go down to the sector level and look at individual firms and individual sectors. But also this key point about it's not, government's problem, fix it. Is about how do we create this environment where both sides can work effectively on this. And I think that issue of skills exemplifies that perfectly. So that brings us to the end. Could I just say thank you to all those who contributed to the report. If you'd like to know more about it or have the top team come to your organisation to give a talk on it, I think I'm allowed to say that? Yep. Or your events, they'll happily travel the world to talk about this. That's very important. Please, if you haven't read it yet, do read it and share it and comment on it. We'd love to hear more feedback on that. But most importantly, could I just say thank you to the audience, both here in the room and online, to our authors of the report for the amazing amount of work they've done and responding to questions earlier, and also to our excellent panel today. Could you please join me in thanking all of those people? And that draws the event to a close. Thank you very much.